Again, my name is Amy Ahern. I'm the Associate Director for Plus Acumen, and I'm joined here this morning by Rob and Becky from the Omidyar group. You will probably recognize Rob from all the videos that you have been watching, but we're very grateful to have them both here today. And if you're following along in the course, you should be at the point now where you are conducting your SAT analysis, but we would welcome any questions up until those first 3 modules. So as you've been working through the course materials, we know that you've probably been doing a lot of reading and work. So please feel free to submit your questions in the box to the right, and we will get to as many of them as possible. I will say, please keep your microphone muted until we are addressing your question, and then please feel free to engage with us directly or by typing in the chat box. So with that, Rob, do you first just have any general guidance for what people should be thinking about at this point in the course? We know it's very intensive.
Yeah, it's hard to speak to something that will make sense for everybody. One thing I wanted to say up front, based on our experience with these last time, is I kind of felt like people censored themselves on the questions they asked, sort of not wanting to ask something that appeared to be, less enlightened than somebody else, or that maybe Becky or I would think. And I just want to let you know that I challenge any of you to ask a stupider question than I asked when I was learning this stuff. So you have a really high bar to overcome there. So I don't think anybody's going to surpass that. Just I'm pretty confident in that prediction. Yeah. So please just let us know whatever you're thinking or concerned about, or have thought about it, or if there are things you thought about, hey, would it be interesting to do something differently? And have we had experience with that, or anybody else in the group had experience with that? I think the one thing I'll say, I think at this stage, when people are getting into this work, is there's oftentimes a questioning of, do I really need to sort of think that big? Like, do I really need to open up my lens that broad? And it is probably the single biggest mental model adjustment that our teams have gone through when they've got to this point, whether they verbalize that or not, is that a lot of times we think about planning and being effective as sort of focusing in on the piece or the tactic or the issue that we think is most important. And this seems to be taking you away from that, right? It seems to be saying, well, I want to go over here. Why am I looking at stuff way over here? And it's sort of the leap of faith at this point that thinking broadly before acting deeply or even thinking deeply is going to have huge dividends for you. And it may not even be dividends you realize in the course of this course. It may be things that are important to you 2, 3, 4 years down the road. They may be issues or questions or problems that you anticipated at this stage that may not become as relevant to you until you see it later. So when the big payoff for a lot of this work, this is a big investment in the future of your engagement. And you're really investing in kind of helping you do sense making over the course of your engagement. So it's not like you're doing this for the map and then we can put the map to the side. It's the ability to sort of see a system in these dynamic terms is an always piece for you. And we're just sort of getting started in the first round of that. And so I would say just be patient, go with that, like take it on faith that this is thinking broadly at this point, opening up the aperture to things that you never wanted to know about even, may actually be really helpful to you pretty soon down the line, and certainly over the long term.
That's great. Very helpful advice. Before we take the first question, Becky, do you have any starting words of wisdom for people who are just beginning the course?
Yeah, I'll build on that. Thanks for opening it up, Rob. Really happy to be with everyone. It looks like we have a pretty small group, which is actually fortuitous. So hopefully this can be a bit more of a conversation rather than Rob and I speaking at you. So if you have video, go ahead and turn it on. We would love to see other folks' faces. Otherwise, just happy to engage in conversation.
Can you see me?
Yes. Hey, Arslan.
Yes, okay.
Yep, I do.
How's it
Welcome.
going?
Good to see you. The 2 things that I'll build on quickly from Rob, one is that at this point in the course and in our work with teams, often they start to realize the investment of time that this project or process is going to take. So if you're feeling like it's becoming a little bit cumbersome or bigger than you thought, you're not alone. Most folks realize it at this point. And hold on to the idea that it might be worth it. It's not for everyone. However, just like Rob said, if you invest the time up front, you're going to see the benefits later down the line. And the second thing that I think I'll share just at this point is that the first time that you do it, just like anything, is often the most difficult. So once you start to build your muscles in systems mapping, it just gets a lot easier for you. So if you have another project in a year or two, or even just a mini project and you want to do really mini rapid analysis on it, once you have these muscles, it becomes a lot easier. So just a reminder, the first time is the most difficult, but once you start to get these skills down, it'll become almost second nature to you, and it'll help you do much more rapid analyses that are complexity aware in the future once you get through it this first time. So stick with it, and it's worth it later on.
Great. Thank you both. And I see we have Angela on the call here, and she had one of the first questions. So I don't know if you want to unmute your microphone, you can feel free to ask it directly.
No, I'm not sure if I can speak loud here because I'm at the office and there's a lot of people here. Like, I don't want to make any noise. But hi.
Hi.
The thing is that I'm with 4 different teams here at the foundation in Bogota, and it's been a little bit difficult for me to help them understand how they can connect their challenges with their near stars and guiding stars, because sometimes they want to focus a lot of what they want to do, and I keep telling like and inviting them to think not from their work or their I don't know, the solution they already think they have, but to think more on what they might like the system look like.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been difficult. So there's a specific team that is working with the foundation as a system, and they are part of the management team, and they are like, I don't know, I think they're having really big problems letting the solution aside and taking like a, I don't know, like a step into the uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think they are afraid of the response they might found. Like maybe the foundation isn't working as they hope, something like that.
Yeah. That's great, Anna. That you just summarized a lot of the sort of, I think, traditional, one of the other, I think, really important pain points for teams and organizations as they go through this is that we are so if you think, so just I think something you mentioned that you sort of referred to fairly quickly that I think is really, really, really important, could be its own course even, is the complexity within the organization changing alongside how you deal with the complexity outside the organization. So the organization has, like any system, right? You have dynamics and patterns of behavior and assumptions. You have your own SAT, right? You have your own structures, you have your own attitudes, you have your own behaviors, many of which you're conscious of and many of which you're not conscious of. And it was probably some of the most painful, difficult issues that some of our organizations confronted was actually really understanding and confronting a lot of the internal dynamics that they had. And that's totally separate from whether they were doing systems or some other sort of process that was a fundamental sort of shift in how they think and work. It is that uncertainty. I mean, you put your finger on it. It was that, I think it's one of the big barriers or challenges is we're telling people to embrace uncertainty and actually not just others, uncertainty about what others are thinking and saying, but uncertainty about what you're thinking and saying. And that's really hard, at any point. And and I think that's what people have to confront. So yeah, there's that bit of um, like there was you reminded me of a story of a line that someone said once in one of the organizations who had so they had a technological approach or a technology that they really wanted to invest in, and they're looking at this problem which was you know basically around human rights dealing with human rights issues as part of a peace transition process, right? And he was trying to do a systems map, and he wouldn't let go of technology as the answer. And he, at one point, we're sort of trying to do this mapping. At one point, he says, "Look, I know technology is in here somewhere," and like he was gonna find it, like he had to find his answer somewhere. And it can be very helpful just to be very open about that, right? So to say that that's not wrong. I mean, it's not wrong for us to feel attached to the work we may have been doing for years. And to recognize it is hard to sort of step outside of your own thinking and your own action in a way that truly opens yourself up, and then even more so to do that with a group of your peers, where you're also worried about how I want to look competent, I want to look smart, and so this is when you do this in teams in an organization, like you're doing it in several teams in the organization, so you're really engaging the whole organization now. It's just the best. I think the first step is always just to lay that out and to say this is a problem everybody struggles with, and it's a natural problem, it's a human problem, and it needs a bit of a working alliance agreement amongst the team members to say, look, why don't we hold each other? First of all, we're gonna have compassion for each other as we go through this, right? So we can't it's not to sanction someone if you feel like they're getting too wedded to their way of thinking and not opening up. And then on the other hand, we each have to help each other do that because it's really hard for any one of us to do it on our own. Becky, I know you've dealt a lot with this with the teams you're with. Sorry to sort of ramble on a bit, but what would you add, or what would you say?
Yeah, Anhel, that was a really good question. And Rob, I obviously appreciated your response. I think the only thing I guess plus one on, one is that your intuition is right, Anhela, that you do want to zoom out at this point. If you get really narrow on your near star and guiding star, you foreclosed a lot of opportunities where you might end up finding higher leverage. So your gut is right, and I would continue to push your team to try to zoom out a little bit, knowing they're going to get to the solution space, but it's not going to be for a little bit longer than they might be used to. So sometimes I found it helpful when I work with teams to let them know when they're going to have that conversation, when we're going to get into the solution space. So if you have a sense of your timeline, it can be reassuring to folks to know it's going to happen and we're going to get there. But to slow down a little bit, knowing that it's going to let us speed up and get to better solutions when we get to that point. And for some people, it's even a date when they get to that point in the process. They want that level of clarity so that they can hold on to the discomfort and the uncertainty, knowing it's not going to be for forever, but letting that space be more open to actually define the problem together. And as the problem as part of a broader, more complex system will ultimately lead to typically much better results and better clarity of thinking.
Do you want to follow up, Anhala? Is there we spoke to a bit of what you discussed, but is there other issues?
I think you're muted. If you can unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you. I think that Becky's idea of maybe setting a date specifically may help. And no, I don't think I have more questions at this time, but sure, on the next steps. Thank you. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah.
You both. Okay, next question I saw come in the chat box is from Jackie, who's in the UK. And it looks like she is working on mapping UK charities and community projects so that people in crisis can find help available. And it looks like her question is, I'm finding it hard to be brief when describing the guiding star, near star, and framing question because we are thinking so broadly for the long term. I get nervous that I'm not covering the important parts. So any guidance you would have on how to formulate that near star, guiding star, and framing question?
Becky, do you want to take that one first?
Yeah, I'll dive in. Thanks for your question, Jackie. So I guess the first thing I typically tell teams in response to this type of question is to not put too much pressure on yourself right away to get the perfect near star and guiding star. So if you hold it lightly, in the next few steps, you're going to learn a lot more about your system that might cause you to change it anyways. So definitely, of course, try to get something that resonates with you, that you're really excited about, that your team is going to show up for. But don't be driving for perfect right away, knowing that it might change anyways. Rob, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion. That it is something that is also kind of a pain point for people, is that when you go through this analysis, want to people are used to sort of the sort of reductionist model of thinking, that you want to think very deeply and very exactly about a smaller and smaller set of things. And then you say, let's think about systems, of thinking, oh, let's apply that same way of thinking, but to everything. And so then it's hard to kind of make choices because you're thinking, well, everything matters now. And you're in this weird dance of, this is the hold the lightly part I think Becky was talking to, of you're gonna proceed on certain assumptions and certain perspective or analysis, knowing that it's going to change. So I think that's maybe the fundamental thing to hold on to. The other thing I would say, it can feel a little bit superficial to say we want to have a guiding star and a near star that are kind of pithy and memorable and sticky, that people hear it and they so I acknowledge that you don't want this to sink in kind of just like an artificial sort of wordsmithing piece. There is, though, I think also sometimes the difficulty of having a kind of clean, neat guiding or near star is a sign of a deeper lack of choice making around what are you fundamentally after. And I would say that was something that was, I think, my early learning with working with teams, is they needed much more help of talking through what is it that they're actually after. What at the end of the day was really going to make this initiative satisfying to say to them they actually accomplished something of value. And it took a lot, especially of internal discussion, for people to figure that out. So you want to be sure that what you've articulated is not just a sort of patchwork of everybody's got their thing here, and we haven't really gone through the difficult thinking of what truly are we united around. Again, knowing that you're going to change it, so the goal is not perfect, right? But I would push to see if you can't find that articulation that is fairly streamlined, and that people remember that the test of a good guiding star and near star is if you talked about that in a 2-hour meeting, and then I asked people after the meeting what was the guiding star or the near star, if they couldn't tell me, then it's probably too long. So it has to be at least that level of sticky, that it's got to be something people can keep in their head. So I would just keep pushing on that, on the what are we really after, because everything else will be harder if there's some fundamental disagreement even at the guiding star level about where you're actually trying to go. And then what should the map you build actually help you do? Well, if people disagree about where they're trying to go, then you're never going to get a map that truly provides insight, because it's going to try to be everything to everybody. So the only thing I would push on is just the clarity and the choice making around guiding and near can be helpful. And again, as I just caveat all that with what Becky started with, which is, and everything hold lightly. Guiding star should be a little more fixed than near star, and near star you definitely need to hold very lightly.
Very helpful. Looks like Arslan had a question too. Do you want to ask it directly? Just make sure you're unmuted first. think just make sure your microphone is unmuted.
There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, now you're muted again. Sorry, you're unmuted for a second.
There we go.
Yeah.
So, thank you so much, Robert. Really, I'm really enjoying this. My name is Arslan. I'm calling from Democracy Fund. This is sort of my intern project. I've taken this on as a 3-month-long project for me to sort of work on. In the third week, I sort of sat down and thought, wait, this sort of sometimes feels like sort of 2 steps forward, 1 step forward, 2 steps backward. And I was wondering whether that feeling is normal. I also was kind of unsure about the challenge that we're trying to sort of tackle. Tom Glazer wrote a paper on this. Is democracy a threat to is social media a threat to democracy? And sometimes it's just difficult for me to envision the final product. I know it's going to be some sort of a visualization that I can sort of put it out there, but I also worry once this visualization is done, does it not just reflect my team's understanding of the issue? As soon as somebody who's an expert on that topic will look at it, because obviously we're not experts on this topic. Will they take question to how we have visualized it or how we've analyzed it? And I wonder how to remedy that.
Yeah, pretty fundamental stuff. Arslan. You guys are making me think early. I'm in Hawaii, so it's
that's great.
Early for us. But
you're seeing a lot of our colleagues there. Liz and Donata and them.
Oh, that's right. They're I'm not with them, but yes. So several things, and Becky, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure I didn't catch all of them, but so I think on the one that struck me was hey, we're not experts, and isn't this just a visualization of what we think? And I would say there is value. Well, so let me flip it and say, is the alternative to not do it, which is not what you're suggesting, I know, but so sometimes people feel like it's not going to be perfect and it's not going to be expert. So is it really worth me investing my time in it? And at the very fundamental level, I would say the converse can't be true, right? Which is, so because I'm not expert, and it's just our team's internal thinking, we shouldn't have an understanding of the complexity of the ecosystem that we're working in. Because however you do it, I think that's a must-have, right? Whether you do mapping or you do some other thing, right? It's that understanding of the system within which you work is a complex system, and to be able to draw the potential connections between what you're doing or trying to do and that system and vice versa is a must-have, right? So you need something, right? So even if it's imperfect and unexpert, it's better than nothing. Now it can't be something that's I would say the one caveat I make to that, which is if it was like delusional in the sense of it was really just I made this up, like it has absolutely no connection to reality, that is worse, right? If we're just talking within ourselves. So the standard I think you've got to hold yourself to is not necessarily is it expert, but is it grounded? Does it actually reflect both what I think and what my team thinks, but also can we ground it in what we're seeing outside of us? So it's that are we truly listening to the system as best we can at some point? One of the last thing I wanted to say on expert, and I'm hoping Becky has answers to everything else you asked about, is The work, the person who wrote, Tetzlaff, who wrote the piece on super forecasters, did the research on super forecasters, which,
Yeah.
right? So they basically found, for those of you who haven't seen that or don't remember that, they basically compared over a significant period of time, the ability of expert predictors with like sensitive classified information to predict world events versus a group of just ordinary, non-expert people who had only public sources of information. And they basically found that those that were the non-experts outperformed the experts by a significant degree. And so there, and I think this is true where, again, if you're really grounded in the system, you'll find that people who are, I would say people who are like more important than expertise is knowledge of the system. And you might say, well, we have neither, right? So we're neither in the system nor are we necessarily expert. I would say that the thing to do is not try to become an expert. It's actually to know the system. So listen to people, read interviews. I mean, there's lots of reasons to do that. The thing to think about also then with a visualization, the visualization is just a tool. I mean, it's just a way of clarifying your thinking and testing your thinking with others. As more and more people look at this and give you more and more feedback, you're going to improve. So people think of it as improving the map, but really what you're doing is improving your team's own mental understanding of what you're trying to grapple with. So yeah, I would. The big caveat is as long as you're grounding this in what you know about the system as best you can, the other stuff is less important to me. But Becky, what else did you pick up on?
Yeah, that was a super meaty question, Arslan. And so without knowing a ton about your project, there's a few things I guess I would respond back. So the first is knowing what your own goal is in this project. So is your goal to learn mapping yourself, just that it's a skill set and way of thinking that you have? Or is your broader goal to bring a team along with you with this mapping process? So are you trying to influence the way that your team is thinking and help your team develop knowledge? Or is it really just more important that you learn this yourself? So because I know your team does this work, that you can participate in it. So if it is the latter, being that you want to actually improve the way that your team is thinking about something, not just your own personal learning goals, then I think it really matters that you bring them along with you. So I think you're right that if it is just a map of what is in your own head, it's useful and it's useful for yourself, but probably not sufficient. And that it'd be a bit of a missed opportunity to bring other people into the room to have them think together. So I don't know what your specific time constraints look like, but one thing we talk a lot about with teams is being mindful of who is in the room, and the folks that are in the room contributing to the analysis in one way or another are going to reflect the ultimate output. So whose voices show up in the map. So just like Rob said, do you have access to certain experts? And those are the voices you hear, but you're missing another subset of voices that may not be traditionally thought of as experts, but they have a really different perspective and view on the system that might ultimately be really helpful. So there's never a perfect answer, and you can always have more people participate, but it's just right sizing the amount of participation that's going to be most useful for you in your project. And I try to come up with a really simple spreadsheet or just tracker to I guess, take note of who you are listening to, whether it's reports that you're reading or people that you're interviewing or people that are actually participating in your little workshops. And then try to map them to see, do you have a bias toward one sector or another, or people with certain backgrounds versus another? And then to visually see it can be striking sometimes because you realize your own bias and just who you're most comfortable working with because they're people that are friends or close in your network. And you might see some gaps. And based on that, not a big deal, but it's just a call then or a reminder to go out and reach out to certain folks that you wouldn't have otherwise spoken with and that you may have missed their perspective on the system. And the last thing that I always remind folks is that the map is always wrong. It's not the territory, right? So don't drive toward perfect. Drive toward a better, more clear understanding of the complexity, and don't hold it so tightly and become convinced that you have the vision of the world, which is so hard, right? After you invest this much time in trying to get to a really amazing, helpful map. But just holding on to the fact that it's always wrong, it's helpful, but it's wrong. And so anytime you can include someone else's voice, it gets better. But you'll never get a perfect picture of reality.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really helpful. And I think we've now run this course. This will be the third time, and I think Becky's advice to kind of reflect on your goals and what you hope to achieve by undertaking this whole process is really important. We've seen kind of two patterns of how people use the course that I just want to emphasize here too, because I think it's been useful for people in the past. So one is really just auditing the course, doing the work, but in a kind of accelerated way to really understand what the process is like and get a taste of it. And then that's probably realistic for what you could accomplish in this 12-week time period. If you really want to undertake systems mapping and do this process in as rigorous a way as is presented in the case studies in the course, you can kind of get a sense of what the milestones are this time, but even come back the next time the course runs and upload all your work. Because we know that to fully undertake a very intensive systems mapping process can take longer than 12 weeks. So I just wanted to flag that for people too, that we've seen you can use the course to get a taste of the methodology, but if you really hope to get a robust systems map where lots of different people have participated in the process, it will likely take longer than what we have over this duration of the single course. So just to flag that for people too.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then it looks like we had a question from Natalie just around examples of guiding and North Stars. And so I don't know, Rob and Becky, if you have one example to talk through or places you would direct people to if they want to figure out what those examples might be.
Becky, do you have fresher ones on your head?
Not on the top of my head.
Mine.
Yeah, we have a lot. But if you haven't already checked out the workbook, I don't remember what page specifically, but there are examples in the workbook. So that's a really good place to start.
18.
Thanks, Arslan. Page 18. So we do have examples in there. I'm guessing that you saw those, though, and have more questions about them. So I'm curious what your question is about the examples that we have or what your difficulty is that we might be able to speak to more directly. So I'm not sure if you're able to jump on the audio or just reply back again in the chat function to speak to your specific question.
It looks like maybe she hadn't seen the examples before. She's saying, okay, thanks, to look at page 18. But Natalie, please feel free to follow up if you have any additional questions. We're happy to answer them. And we can jump back to Jackie now. She says, Slate side question, Kumu looks as though it will be really helpful to map everything. However, do you know if there is a video guide anywhere that shows a completed map and then the steps they took to create the map? And that is a great question. I will just preview that Kumu site itself has lots of support documentation and help documentation. So there are tutorial videos there along with reading material. And our next office hours session will be with Jeff, who's the CEO of Kumu, and he will specifically be introducing you to kind of a tutorial of how to use Kumu. So you can tune in live for that as well and get questions answered live. And I will follow up with a date for that session. But yes, plenty more supporting documentation coming soon.
Just the other thing I would say with Kumu is just nothing. I used to use this in the graduate course that I taught. All of our students use Kumu, and Becky was one of those. So maybe this was not good advice on my part. But I basically said there's really nothing I think that replaces just getting on and playing. Because Kumu is designed to be very intuitive. It's just that sometimes it's not our intuition. Like it doesn't match how you would do it. But there's just a little bit of playing around and realizing, oh, it's a couple keystrokes here gets me where I want to go. And so I would say just like give yourself at least a half an hour to go play, and then maybe schedule like something fun afterward, like a massage or dessert or something. Like reward yourself for doing it.
Yeah, it's not that bad, but it does take there's a bit of a learning curve. So typically I have teams pick one person who becomes the Kumunista or the Kumu expert on the team. So one person who's really going to learn it and be responsible for it. And have a few other people that at least feel comfortable making edits to the map. So they might not need to be a deep user, but they can at least go in and navigate, and they feel comfortable that they're not going to destroy the map. So do spend a little bit of time in Kumu getting to know it. But also, and the flip side of what I think I hear underneath your question is that Kumu doesn't make magic happen. So it's an amazing software that makes the work of systems mapping much easier than it was prior to Kumu. It's fairly user-friendly. However, there's a general principle of garbage in, garbage out, right? So what you put into your map is your map. It doesn't all of a sudden make more sense to you or become higher quality because it becomes digitized. It's easier to move things around and brainstorm and play with it. But Kumu itself won't change the quality of your map. So focus rather on the thinking outside of the computer. And then once you start to digitize it, just use that as a way to refine your thinking.
Great. And that office hours session I mentioned is next Tuesday, March 13th at 9 a.m. Pacific. So if you do have more questions, we'll be back next week with more information on how to use Kumu specifically. And then jumping back to Natalie, she said it was an add-on to the earlier question about the star being grandiose. I was wondering if the format of the question has a formula. So how would you actually go about formulating one of those framing questions? Is there any more specific guidance you could provide?
Becky, you probably have better formulas than I do.
No, I think my answer is going to be really unsatisfying, guys. There isn't a formula, right? So it just matters that it really resonates with your team. So if you're working with a few folks, you don't have to, there doesn't have to be total consensus, but there does have to be a certain amount of buy-in that this is going to ultimately frame your analysis. And so trying to get a certain level of buy-in that it resonates with you. But ultimately, there is no formula. The only, I think, tip I would give is to make sure that you don't have a specific solution baked in that's going to limit your ability to see other potential opportunities. So similar to the question we got on the beginning of the call, where I think it was Angela's team wanted to be really focused on the thing they wanted to do. But by limiting their analysis to that, they wouldn't have been able to see the broader context in which it was embedded and what was actually creating that problem. And so sometimes going upstream provides us higher opportunities for leverage. So again, just make sure it's not a really specific solution that's baked in. Otherwise, you're gonna miss a lot of opportunity there.
I would be at the risk of getting chastised by Becky. I would be so I think there is a little bit for me like a very loose sort of template in my mind, which is for guiding star, it's always a system is like the first part of the sentence is a system, like it can be a community, the state of Hawaii, if people look at global supply chains as sort of the system. So there's something about the guiding star is something like the system in which blank happens, or in that you want to speak to sort of systemic outcome. So supply chains and elimination of slavery is the sort of systems output that you wanted, or people who have sustainable livelihoods in which they can thrive, or something like that, right? That speaks something to so it's what is the system that you're talking at, and what is the outcome you'd like to see from that system at the guiding star level. And then at the near star level, it's thinking a significant step to that. So oftentimes people pick things like, so it's an outcome that you believe is a significant step toward that guiding star, and giving yourself like a 10-year vision around to base this off. So it's not something you think you can accomplish next year or even in 5 years. It may take 10 years to get there. So that may be like new practices or other things that help. That if you could see that happening, you would feel more confident that you're getting closer to a system that no longer had slavery in supply chain. So maybe the adoption of different kinds of tools. It may be or different kinds of practices, or changing of certain kinds of incentives or something like that in the system. And then the framing question, I think, is often what forces enable or inhibit, like what forces determine the level of slavery in supply chains. So it was lack of slavery in supply chains, proven, policies, mechanisms, investment behavior that favors the reduction of slavery, something like that, as a near. And then as the framing was basically what what determines the level of slavery in corporate supply chains, or what enables or inhibits slavery in supply chains. So you're kind of taking that subject that's been in your guiding and near stars and just say, what's the system that does that?
Yep, yeah, I totally agree, Rob. So the near star, if you just flip it, it turns it into the framing question. You use the same language. Just like Rob said, you basically just add in front of it what forces account for, dot, 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 and the dot, dot, dot is whatever is in your near star. The idea is that you actually have to step back to ask what forces are accounting for that near star, so that you then have a better shot of having a more clear understanding of what is that system and then what you might be able to do about it.
Great. Very helpful. And it looks like we have about 20 minutes left. So I do want to encourage you, if you have any questions that you've been sitting on or too afraid to ask, as Rob said at the beginning, there are no stupid questions here. We know that this is complicated. So
if anything, I'm feeling really stupid at my stupid questions because you guys are asking such great questions. So,
and I see, let's see, we have a few other people here. We have Gerald joining us. He researches and works on systems theory approaches, so he's probably an expert here, but happy to have your questions submitted. And then I also saw Anthony is joining from D-Lite, which is an Acumen investee company, so we would love to be helpful there too. So even if you already asked a question, feel free to jump in with another one.
So while we wait for some more questions to see if anything pops up, one thing that I find helpful to chat about in this call is what's coming next. So it sounds like most of you are starting to dig into your SAT analyses. And then from there, of course, you're going to start to create loops. And one thing that I find helpful to know at this stage is why we do SAT. So Rob, maybe you can touch on that once I close this loop. But then the second part is how we get from SAT to loops, and again, why we do it. So I'll hand over to Rob to answer, I guess, for why SAT, and then maybe I can pick up after that.
Yeah, the deep background for me on SAT was a feeling when I used to do my primary work was in the conflict resolution, negotiation, mediation sector, that we had a framework for key variables you need to understand that were critical to the success of any negotiation or mediation effort. And that was really helpful as our diagnostic tool for when we went into a new situation, because I was always going into situations where I was not expert in the substance. And I needed a quick way to get a grasp on what the people I was working with were trying to work on and were facing, as well as how do I help them come at an issue they've been dealing with for years in many cases. And when I got into the systems work, I was kind of looking for something similar and not really finding it. And that's where SAT came from, as a way of trying to think broadly about what's in a system, because the big temptation or the danger is kind of going back to what we talked about at the beginning of the call about not wanting to let go of your answer. Is SAT is basically speaks to that problem and says, well, even though like my tactic might be correct, let me step back and understand why it's correct. Like, are there structural issues that it's addressing, attitudinal issues, behavioral issues? The idea behind SAT is that really for a system to be healthier or to change, systems change requires change across those three dimensions. And if systems thinking requires us to see interconnection between lots of disparate issues, we have to kind of force ourselves to think in different categories, right? So that when I did the negotiation work, for example, I was very skilled in and knowledgeable about the transactional sector, but the interaction and how people influence, negotiate, and lead, but not strong on structural and I dealt with the attitudinal issues that pertain to individual people, but less so on like a societal or system-wide level. And needed to force myself to get into this, to not just zero in on the stuff that I knew best, which was the transactional stuff, but to force myself to think broadly before I went to that. So the SAT is basically just a way of forcing us to try to think broadly before we go too deep.
Cool. Yeah. So basically, it's just a way to be more holistic. So as you're doing your SAT brainstorms, if you have a lot in the structural, ask yourself or your team, what are the attitudinal aspects of that? Or what are the transactional aspects of something? And it helps you just tease out differences or distinctions that you might not otherwise see. So often it can be a little bit clumsy the first time that you use SAT. And so maybe you felt that you're trying to kind of force yourself into a framework that isn't intuitive to you. But give it a shot. See if it helps you come up with ideas or see things in a system that you wouldn't see otherwise. And then as you start to finish up some SATs and move on to looping, one thing that's helpful to know, I think, is that typically for each SAT analysis, you can get about 2 to 5 different feedback loops that are based on the data that you came up with, the information you documented from the SAT analysis. But don't feel like you have to be wedded to what's in the SAT, right? So think of it as starter yeast. It's a really good brainstorm that then gives you a lot of content from which to start to develop feedback loops. So don't stick to only what you see in the SAT. It's really good starter content and use it as yeast to start to create your feedback loops. We ourselves have even tried to skip SAT before. We thought like, oh, we can go straight from enablers, inhibitors to feedback loops. And what ended up happening and what I've seen happen for other people is that it actually ends up taking more time because you don't have that brainstorm first. We thought we could go straight from enablers, inhibitors to identifying the patterns, which is essentially a feedback loop. And it just took longer because we were brainstorming in the form of feedback loops, which is a little bit more difficult. So take the time to at least do a quick SAT. And again, don't be wedded to it. And see what different feedback loops or versions you can get, knowing that later on in the process, you're going to start to prioritize which feedback loops are the best ones or most helpful. And then at that point, you can even combine different feedback loops or get rid of some or create new ones until you really settle on what the best way is for you to tell the different stories that are surfacing in the system.
Great. Very useful advice to keep in mind as everyone moves forward. I want to give everyone one more chance. If you do have those last burning questions, to submit them. Otherwise, we can wrap up early if no one has any outstanding questions. And I did see before, we will make a recording of this office hour session available. So if you want to go back and refer to an answer that someone said earlier or share it with other members of your team who are not able to join live, we will send that out by email later today and post it in the course as well. And the other reminder is just that the sessions with Jeff on Kumu will be next Tuesday, so you can put that on your calendar. What if our team gets stuck? That is a good question, Arslan. Any suggestions, Rob and Becky?
Yeah, I just in my team there's 6 of us, and the sort of some of them are more observers, so sort of they're staying in the background, giving input. The they have already said that I am the one who's going to be pushing this thing forward, and so there's a bit of diplomacy involved as well, like asking them when their input is required, but also making sure that you're not hurting cats. And so the issue that I've sort of I'm foreseeing in the future, that potentially is, what if we get to a point, say week 6 or week 7, and you're like, I don't know if this was the right path for us to take. We don't know where to go from here. And in that case, I wonder if there is, what approach should we take to sort of move past that? Or we could look reflectively. One of the things I've been doing is actually keeping a vlog. So I record myself on the photo booth on my Mac, and I say week 2 systems practice, and then I talk about my readings and what we are learning, what I don't understand. And yesterday I looked back at one of them and I said, I don't know what I'm doing. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the sort of week to week, like So that might have been like 10% uncertain after week one, and I'm another 10% uncertain, which makes me like 80% uncertain after two, and another 10%. So I'm 70% uncertain after three, and then by week 6 or 7, I'm like, I have no idea what the frig I'm doing. So I would say lean into that. Like don't. There's a there. I think part of the sort of systems mentality to me is to realize that there's a high tolerance for error here, and maybe it's not as exacting as if you were, building a car engine or a microchip or something where the integrity of each step it builds each subsequent step requires the 100% integrity of the step before it.
Right.
This is less so that way. I would say you mostly need a sense of curiosity about this. So questioning we don't know actually is a sign of you're getting it. So the more you begin to you open up and think of it systemically, the more you sort of think, hey, there's a tremendous amount we don't know, and that's a really important sort of insight. And again, I think all teams that we've worked with have that moment where they thought they knew. They brought in a group of people they thought would tell them, give a really complete view, and they get that group in the room and they say, shoot, we didn't have the right people in the room. And it's not that the wrong people were in the room, it's just that you didn't have a complete idea of who the quote unquote right people or right voices to listen to are. And then I think the other thing is always you're always free to go back. Like you're not going to get penal. Like it's not like you're taking a standardized test where you can't go back and like revise your answers previous in the test. It's not that way at all. In fact, it's good that you might decide we were really going down a particular path, and maybe your framing question was leading you down a particular path, and you get a few steps down that path and realize that wasn't the right framing question, or even the right near star. And in which case, it's not fatal to go back and say, let's broaden it out a little bit and redo a piece of it. So you don't want to start from scratch, but you do want to give yourself the ability to delve into an area or into some information or some voices that you hadn't had before.
Yeah, I'll take on to that, Rob. So Rob is totally right. This is all about iteration. It's not so much as you check off a step, get to move to the next step, and never go back to the previous one. So unfortunate because it means you can't just check it off and move along, but ultimately it's in your favor because it means nothing is final. The more you learn about the system, the more you can go back then and revise. So let's say a new amazing report comes out tomorrow and it changes the way that you're thinking about something. You can totally go back and re-edit an SAT with that new knowledge in a loop. And so it's not final. And so the thing that I guess makes me feel better is that I can always go back and update my loops or my map with the new things that I'm learning rather than feeling like I have to get it right the first time. And if I don't, then I'm in trouble. The two other things that I find helpful, one is just recognizing and acknowledging what you're doing. So you're wading into complexity, which often isn't something that our university experiences have taught us to do, right? So universities are often really deductive and we funnel down and try to get to a very specific answer that no one can dispute. We know that it's correct. But that's really the opposite of a complexity-aware, complexity-based approach. We are trying to grapple with a lot of stuff and make sense of it and trying to hold it all at once. So it's normal to feel like you're kind of on unsteady ground. The uncertainty is normal. If you felt really certain about what you were doing at this point, I would be a little bit more concerned because it usually means you're really not grappling with the complexity. You think you are, but you're holding tightly to something. So it's normal, and I'd be worried, I think, if you were feeling the opposite. And then the last thing that I found helpful is actually having deadlines. So as you start to steep or wade into this complexity, it can be difficult to know when to surface or when to pause and then decide that you're just going to move on to the next step, right? So you could do SATs forever and never be done. And at some point, you have to put a pause on it. You have to move on to the next step, knowing you can always come back, but you have to keep moving. Or you could do mapping forever and then never actually take any action. So I found it helpful to have deadlines that you try to stick to when it's helpful, to know to keep moving through the process so that you don't get stuck on trying to get perfect products or get it right.
Very helpful. Thank you.
think about getting the process down more than the product, right? So like Amy was saying, that it's one of the way people have used the courses, or way it's just like you're sampling the different stages in the process, even though if you were going to apply this to as many of you are, right? So a live challenge, an issue you currently are working on, is to get the process down, knowing that you may need to go back and apply that more rigorously at a later point. Yeah, I mean the thing, Arslan, that just I remember with a lot of our teams, there was one team that did their map, and then they were like 4 or 5 months into their strategy, and they realized half of their strategy was like just got blown up.
Yeah.
And they were like kind of freaked out, and maybe that was an understatement. I said, so wait, just take a deep breath. Is there anything that happened when you tried this particular approach, which based on your map you thought was going to be a reasonable thing to do? I said, is there anything in your map that explains what happened? And they looked and they said, oh yeah, there's this, it just shows up as a factor, but that factor really is like a couple loops that we need to build. Okay. So even when you get to that point where this team had been, worked long and hard on their map, made trips to the region that they work in and so on, and it still doesn't mean you're not gonna. There's gonna be some stuff you didn't either focus on at all, or didn't have the right level of zoom on, that you might need to go deeper, or you might have done, but you kind of didn't have right, that you realize the dynamic didn't quite work the way you thought it did. That's always gonna be there, right? So it's building that understanding. I would say that sufficient level of understanding to carry you into the process. So you're making reasonable assessments and reasonable choices based on a sufficient understanding of the system, as grounded as best you can in the system itself, and knowing that from there you're going to learn and adapt. And it's doing it for the right reasons is what you're trying to get now. It's like we want our baseline so that we can start to learn and adapt that underlying sort of understanding of the system. We need to do that proactively and rigorously, so that we're not just going from, we tried this and didn't work, now we're going to try that, and which doesn't have an integrity to it.
Thank you.
Really helpful. So in the last 3 minutes, we have one final question from Natalie that's a little bit more big picture, but she is interested in, so say you take this course, you start to really enjoy systems thinking, system mapping. What types of organizations or sectors do you think should pursue a career? If someone wants to take their systems thinking work to kind of the next level, where are you seeing kind of organizations or groups that are using this methodology?
I mean, there are a lot of organizations that are doing pilots, who are investigating this. We've just been, along with Democracy Fund and Humanity United, have been funding some research, a couple of bits of research around the state of the practice, at least in the philanthropic sector. So I think they talked to several dozen philanthropies that are trying to build systems and complexity into their work. That report from FSG that's coming out, it'll come out publicly probably in a few months. The Academy for Systems Change is doing a lot of work on systems leadership. USA just put out a report on systems leadership, or that's just coming out, I should say. It's not public yet, but there are several places where organizations that are taking this up. And I think for individually, again, it's an always. I've learned to find it invigorating to realize that you never got it done. Like, as much as you think you understand it, there's still a next frontier to think about this. And it's just, it's like viewing the world through this systems lens, basically. And I think that's something that you're going to continue to build, and you're going to continue to develop. And for a lot of folks that we've worked with, I've had a few stories of people coming back to me and saying, like, oh my gosh, like, I got it now. Like, we've been talking about these loops and da-da-da. I was talking to folks, and I was explaining our loops to them without even realizing I was explaining that. That's how I was explaining it, and they got it. Like, they got it really quickly, really fast. So anyway, I think it's just something that you're going to continue to develop individually and organizationally. And there are these organizational reference points, as I mentioned, these reports that are coming out in the next, I would say, 4 months, that are starting to detail the journeys that other organizations have been on.
Yeah, one other resource to check out is the Forum for the Future, and specifically the school, I think it's the School for Systems Change. They run things called base camps, which is essentially for professionals who want to add systems thinking to their toolkit. So a really cool opportunity. But then the only other thing I'd add, I guess, is that not everyone who does systems waves the systems banner or flag. So there's a lot of systems thinkers within organizations. They might just not do mapping, or it might not be on their website advertising that they do it. And so it's the way that people show up. You can often just ask questions and figure out if people are on the same wavelength as you, and if they also want to improve their own systems thinking. So don't just look for folks that do mapping, though it's often an indicator. It's not the only way to be a systems thinker. And then one other amazing resource that you guys have because you're part of this course are the other folks in this course. So take a look at the other participants, look at their email addresses, see where they work, and reach out to each other. By just being in the course, you already know that you guys are interested in being systems thinkers. So make use of all the other incredible resources that you have in this course, aside from Rob and I. There are literally thousands of other people who are doing this work alongside you, so take advantage of that.
That's great. And Natalie, the organization that runs the base camps, I see that question is School for Systems Change. Is that what it's called, Becky?
Yep, I'll paste a link to it in just a second in the chat function.
Yep. So Rob and Becky, thank you so much for joining us from Hawaii and from California. I know it's early in both of those places, but thank you all for the great questions and the participation, and we hope that the rest of the course goes well for you. You can tune back in here next week on Tuesday for our next office hour session, which will be with Jeff of Kumu. So Rob and Becky, thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks
Thanks
everybody.
everyone.
Good luck.
See you in the course.